Row for Show Productions presents Humble Beginnings, the Undrafted Podcast. Welcome to Humble Beginnings, the Undrafted Podcast. I'm your host, Rochelle Hamilton Jr., and on today's episode of the podcast, this is episode 55 of the podcast, and we got a good one for you today. In the lowest row, we're going to talk about the Raptors and the Warriors. Man, that game on Friday night, game 4, it was like the tale of two games, man. That was an amazing game. If you missed it, you missed out on a great game. That was a classic, if you ask me. I mean, yeah. And I'm in and I'm out. The Philadelphia Eagles just signed Carson Wentz to a 4-year extension, and I'll talk about the effect that's going to have on Dak Prescott and his negotiations for a new deal with the Dallas Cowboys. And what's the wave with Chef Road Daddy? I had a question come to me by a guy in the gym this past week about growth and things that pertain to it, so you won't want to miss that. And this is some bull jive, man. Going back to the Warriors, you know, one of their part owners, Mark Stevens, shoved Kyle Lowry in Game 3 and said a whole bunch of cuss words at him. In the NBA, they came with one of the weakest punishments I've ever encountered. So I'm going to talk about that, and this is some bull jive, man. So without further ado, let's just get into it with the Low with Row. The Toronto Raptors gave the Warriors that work in Game 4 of the NBA Finals on Friday night. They won Game 4 105-92 to take a commanding 3-1 lead in the series, putting the defending champs on the brink of elimination. And I loved every single minute of it. Now, it's pretty safe to say that this Golden State Warriors squad is not the same Golden State team of years past that we've all gotten so used to. And of course, you got the injuries because, you know, I do have to say Golden State, they have been hit hard by injuries. Even though I still don't like to use injuries as an excuse. Injuries have helped derail their season. Plus, their bench is just not as good as it used to be back when, you know, they had, you know, Harrison Barnes and all those cats. So this is definitely not the same Golden State team that we've gotten used to seeing, with or without KD in the lineup. And even when Kevin Durant was in the lineup, you know, in the regular season, if you remember, they lost 6 games at home by 20 points or more. So this is definitely not the Warriors team that a lot of people are accustomed to seeing. And without Kevin Durant, their glaring weaknesses have been exposed. I mean, they've been magnified. Now, I'm not saying that this series is over by any means, because Golden State, they still have the weapons to win Monday night and possibly even come back to win it all. As highly unlikely as that is, it's not impossible. Because when you have all-time greats like Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green leading your team, you're never truly out of it until the clock is all zero. So for Toronto, Tomorrow night, Toronto has got to handle business, because you don't want to give this Golden State team any kind of life. You've got them where you want them. Now you put your feet on their throat and you close them out. Now, this game started out very sloppy on Friday night for both squads. Both teams were committing sloppy passes, bricks, turnovers to start the first 3 minutes. I mean, it was almost it may have been even a little bit over 4 minutes into the game before Golden State even scored the first shot of the night. Now, I will say this was the tale of two games, man, because in the first half, it looked like Golden State was going to win this game. And then in the second half, Toronto, it was like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation with Toronto, because they looked like they were dead in the water in the first half. And in the second half, Toronto just came alive, because Toronto, they were terrible in shooting in the first half. Toronto, yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit later. The Warriors, they committed a lot of turnovers early in the game. They had 5 turnovers with 5 minutes and 40 seconds left to go in the first quarter. Boogie Cousins, he committed one of the biggest ones when he was bringing the ball up the floor, and then he turned right around and gave the ball away actually, he didn't give the ball away. He turned the ball over when Danny Green chased him down and he stole the ball from him. Now, the Raptors, they were getting great looks. They were getting open shots, but they just couldn't buy a bucket early in the game. They were 3 for 13 in field goals and 2 turnovers with 3 minutes and 45 seconds left in the first quarter. Now, defensively, Golden State, they came out aggressive. They came out smothering the Raptors. They came out sticky. I mean, they were sticking to these dudes like white on rice. Toronto, they had to fight for every single look, every single bucket, every single point early on. Klay Thompson and Kevon Looney, they both returned from their injuries to add much-needed force on defense. even though you could tell neither one of these guys were 100%. And then, and it worked in the first half because Golden State, they limited the Raptors to 42 points. They were 2 for 17 from the three-point line. And then injuries have derailed Golden State's run at a three-peat big time. And these injuries came at the worst possible time, too, because Kevin Durant, of course, he gets injured with his strained calf. And then depending on how Game 5 goes tomorrow night, there's a chance that Kevin Durant won't even play in this series. And now there's a report that came out earlier today that said, he was cleared to practice. And, I don't know how much I'm buying into this because, he may be cleared to practice, but I still don't think Kevin Durant is going to play. And if he does play tomorrow night, I'm not sure how effective he's going to be because, just yesterday today is Sunday. Just yesterday, there was reports saying that he couldn't even make it through practice and, he wasn't ready and da-da-da-da-da. Now, all of a sudden, he's cleared to practice. And now you have people on social media, basketball reporters and everybody else acting like it's confirmed that he's going to play when all he did was practice. And we already know that just because you're cleared to practice does not mean you're cleared to play. And this was a pretty severe calf strain. And I honestly believe this calf strain was a lot more severe than Golden State initially led on. They keep telling folks, oh, he may be ready by the next game. He may be ready by the next game. Give him a few days, give him a week, yada, yada, yada. So, that whole deal, and part of me even wonders, I know Kevin Durant did practice. I know some reporters saw him at practice today. But part of me just wonders, is this like a scare tactic that the Golden State Warriors are trying to lose because they are on the brink of elimination. So you really can't rule out anything at this point. So you have Kevin Durant, he goes out with his calf injury. Then Klay, he injures his hamstring in Game 2. Kevon Looney, he's been a great help on defense for the Warriors this year. He injures his collarbone the other night. Then he surprised a lot of people when he even played in Game 4 because a lot of people were saying that it looked like he wasn't even going to play for the rest of the series. And like I said earlier, the Warriors bench is just not what it used to be. It used to be the best in the league. But it's simply not as good as it used to be. And Toronto, they have taken advantage of every single one of those factors thus far in the series. Golden State, they started the game with urgency and intensity on both sides of the ball. Andre Iguodala, he played great defense on Kawhi. Pascal Siakam, he couldn't get going early. Kawhi Leonard was the only reason why Toronto even stayed within striking distance of Golden State in the first half. Toronto was 4 for 18 in field goals in the first quarter. And like I said, they were getting great looks. They should have had a lot more buckets because they had a lot of open shots. Danny Green, he was cold to start this game after he was red hot in Game 3. He was 0 for 5 from 3 in the entire first half. Now, both teams, they were getting good open looks when it came down to shooting, but the ball just would not fall in. Golden State eventually started having buckets drop for them, but Toronto, they couldn't get anything going early on. But, the telling thing about this particular game was the fact that, Toronto had played so poorly and they had shot the ball so badly. And by the time halftime rolled around, they were only down 4 points, 46-42 to end the half. And when you look at the turnovers, you can kind of see why. Golden State had 10 turnovers in the first half. Toronto had 4 turnovers in the first half. And we all know turnovers will lose you a game quicker than anything else. So the Raptors, for them, for them to be down like that after they had played as bad as they had to have gone into halftime, into that locker room, feeling real good about where they were. Because it's like, man, we've played this bad, we've shot this bad, and we're only down by 4 points. And really, if Kawhi hadn't have had the game that he had in the first half, he had 14 points in the first half. If he hadn't have kept them in striking distance, Toronto could have easily been down 18 in the half. Well, then comes the third quarter. And I mean, in that second half, the switch just flipped. I mean, the game literally just did a 180. So I'm sitting here thinking, bruh, if Toronto can just keep it close in the third quarter, they still have a shot to win this game. Because Golden State, they come out in the third quarter with this big surge, to the point where they drive up a lot of points on you, they close down on you on defense, and they really drive it home, and then in the fourth quarter, they just put you away. And the surge for Golden State is generally so big where a lot of people refer to them as the third quarter Warriors. But Toronto, they had other plans because they said, not tonight, because Toronto, they came out in the third quarter and those boys got hot. Threes started dropping. Buckets started falling. The Raptors defense, they clamped down on these boys. They kept Steph Curry off the free throw line until late in the third quarter. And that was another way how Golden State was able to really kind of start taking advantage of a lot of the fouls that Toronto was giving them, because Toronto was fouling the best shooter in the game, which was insane to me. But, yeah, that's really how Golden State, that's kind of how they started chipping away at some of the leads in some of the earlier games. Now, Toronto, they look like a completely different squad after the half. Give Nick Nurse a lot of credit, because this dude is showing that he can run with the big dogs when it comes to coaching. Now, me personally, I hadn't heard of Nick Nurse before this season. I truly hadn't heard of this dude. And I'm not even sure a lot of people had outside of Toronto. But when it comes down to coaching, man, Nick Nurse, I mean, he's done an amazing job coaching this Raptor squad. I mean, he's not like a household name when it comes to coaching like Steve Kerr or somebody of his ilk. But, man, he has showed that he can run with the big boys. You know, he's got that exotic look defense that they were talking about, the box one, which the box one defense, I had never even heard of it. But apparently it's like a high school defense. A lot of high school basketball teams run it. They sprinkle it in some college, but you rarely, if ever, see a professional basketball team employ this kind of defense. So when the Raptors deployed it, I think it was game 2, possibly. When the Raptors deployed it, you know, you heard Steph Curry call it a janky defense. So when they put it out there, it was a lot of different. It was something that Golden State hadn't seen. So they're throwing basically everything in the kitchen sink at these dudes, and it is working. No, so the Raptors, they come out in the third quarter. They went in scoring 42 points in the first half. They scored 37 points in the third quarter alone. Kawhi Leonard, he had 17 of those points. He finished with 36 points on the night. Kawhi Leonard, man, you know, Toronto has to win one more game. And if they win this one more game, Kawhi Leonard is going to be the NBA Finals MVP by a landslide. He's on the verge of being a legend in Toronto. And to be honest with you, a lot of people are talking like it's a foregone conclusion that Kawhi is going to leave Toronto after the season is over. But, man, you know what? Me personally, I'm not ready to go there. It's just something inside of me just says, you know, to hold up on it, because it's not a guarantee. And, you know, Kawhi, he's that kind of guy. You never know what he's going to do, because he doesn't talk a whole lot. He doesn't tell you what he's thinking. He doesn't say what he's feeling. He really doesn't give any kind of indication as to what's going on in his mind. And, of course, you know, I'm pretty sure he's not even thinking about that at this point in time anyway. But I'm not ready to say that Kawhi Leonard's just going to up and leave Toronto after this season. Now, in the third quarter, Kawhi, he came alive. He came out aggressive. You know, he was 5 for 9 from 3, and he really just took the game over for the Raptors. Now, here's an interesting thing about Kawhi in the 2019 playoffs. Kawhi leads the 2019 playoffs in minutes, points, rebounds, steals, field goals, and free throws. Kawhi Leonard, oh, boy. Kawhi, oh, my. Kawhi Leonard is that dude. Now, Toronto, they killed Golden State in Game 4 with the pick-and-roll game. Kyle Lowry, he was shredding those boys up with the pick-and-roll. Fred VanVleet, he was doing his thing with the pick-and-roll. Marc Gasol, he handled his business. Danny Green, he had a cold start to the game, but he nailed a huge three-point shot with 7 minutes and 25 seconds left to go in the game that really kicked Golden State in the gut. That was really the game where you just, once Danny Green made that shot, that was the shot where you just really kind of saw the life leave out of Golden State. Bruh, I'm telling you, this game on Friday night had some of everything for everybody. It had ups, it had downs, it had highs, it had lows, lead changes, suspense, everything. I mean, oh man, that was a great game on Friday. And the reason why it was such a great game, because I mean, it was the tale of two games. You literally saw Golden State come out and dominate in the first half, and then you saw Toronto come out and dominate in the second half and do what they had to do to take the dub. So, you know, and another thing with Golden State, I mean, we're literally on the verge of seeing a dynasty possibly crumble before our very eyes. And at the same time, we're seeing some legends be made up in Toronto, Canada. And I am loving every single minute of this NBA Finals. It's not quite my dog LeBron, but I'm still loving this great brand of basketball that we're seeing. Now it's time for I'm in and I'm out. So we talk about Toronto, but now we're going to bring it back on home to the Lone Star State, Dallas, Texas to be exact, where the Cowboys and quarterback Dak Prescott continue negotiations on his new deal. And their division rival, the Philadelphia Eagles, didn't make things any easier for the Cowboys. The Eagles gave Carson Wentz a 4-year extension last Thursday and set the market for young quarterbacks in the process. Now, a 4-year deal doesn't seem like much on the surface, but it's really not a big surprise when you consider Wentz's injury history. He finished the last 2 seasons on injured reserve, but he was headed towards an MVP season in 2017, which I honestly, I don't understand how people forget what Carson Wentz did for the Eagles in 2017. It's like people have forgotten what he did to set the table for Nick Foles to come in and take over for him, and when he led them to the Super Bowl. People have forgotten how good of a quarterback. Well, let me not say they have forgotten, but it seems like people have forgotten just how good of a quarterback Carson Wentz is. So, before 2017, before he blew his knee out in that game against the Rams, Carson Wentz, he was basically wrecking through the league. I know he wrecked the Broncos. That game against them in Philly. I think they blew the Broncos out. I think it was like 58-10 or something like that was the score for that game. It wasn't even a game. They gave Denver that work. Anyway, while 4 years seems short, it's really not short when you consider the Eagles already exercised his 5th-year option, which kicks in next season. So technically, this extension that Carson Wentz signed doesn't kick in for another 2 years. So he's still on his rookie deal for this season. Then they exercise the 5th-year option for next season. And then once that next season is over, that's when this contract extension kicks in. So Carson Wentz is essentially under contract with the Philadelphia Eagles for the next 6 years. And this was a smart deal by the Eagles from a financial standpoint. Now, his new deal is worth $128 million, including a record $107.9 million guaranteed. He got $66 million of that guaranteed when he signed his name to the deal. Now, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter, this deal could go up to a max value of $144 million. And the crazy thing is, with the way quarterbacks in the NFL are overvalued and as a result overpaid, this will be a bargain deal in about 2 to 3 years. That's why I said this was actually a smart way for the Philadelphia Eagles to do it, because the last thing they wanted to do is to go into this season or possibly even next season and having to negotiate another deal with Carson Wentz, because you know how the game goes with agents. Whenever they know a team is on a time crunch, they really start to stick it to them. So the Eagles, they really kind of beat him to the punch and said, okay, you know what? We can get out of this deal a little bit cheaper if we go ahead and swallow the bullet now and go ahead and sign him to an extension. We can get him on a little bit cheaper of a deal if we knock it out now. So this was a smart deal for the Eagles to do. Now, some people, they were shocked at Philly giving Wentz all this kind of money, but I honestly don't see why. Because he is the real deal. Now, like I said earlier, yes, Nick Foles took over at the end of 2017 and he led them to the Super Bowl. But let's not forget that Carson Wentz was the Eagles quarterback for 75% of the regular season that particular year. Now, Wentz had a rough year last year, but he also wasn't 100% recovered from that injury, because from the time he stepped on the field, to me, it just looked like, man, you know what? Carson Wentz does not look like the same Carson Wentz. He doesn't have the same movement. He doesn't have the same mobility. He just wasn't the same guy. You could tell that the Eagles rushed him back into action entirely too quick. Now, you can say what you want, but Carson Wentz is the real deal. And the Eagles, they just paid him like it. Now, as far as the Cowboys go, Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys cannot be too happy with what the Eagles just did in giving Wentz this deal, because you already know Dak Prescott is going to want a deal that is similar or possibly even a tad bit more than what Carson Wentz just got. And honestly, I can't really say I blame Dak, because if you go back and you look at Dak and Carson Wentz's numbers side by side individually, they're either comparable, or in some cases, Dak has even better numbers than Carson Wentz. And now you're looking at the point where Dak Prescott definitely ain't taking no pay cuts or no discounts given what just happened over in Philadelphia. So the Cowboys, they've got several different dudes that they got to take care of as far as contracts go. You got Dak coming up, Zeke, Amari Cooper, Jalen Smith, Byron Jones, Alex Brown, and that's just a few of them. To be honest with you, I would not and do not envy anybody in the Cowboys management brass in prioritizing and negotiating these deals. Now, don't get me wrong, Dallas has some really good problems on their hands, because when you have this many guys coming up for contracts and you have to decide which ones to keep and this and that and the other, that says you're picking really good dudes in the draft. So that says your scouting department is on, your scouting department They're doing what they're supposed to do. Your evaluation people, your whole entire process and protocol is on point. So when you have a problem like this, it's a good problem to have. But at the end of the day, it's still a problem. Dallas has some tough choices to make in the next few years, and they can thank the Philadelphia Eagles for making them just a little bit tougher. What's the wave with Chef Rodaddy? I had a question come to me by a guy in the gym in a convo that we were having about a week ago. And this conversation was about growth. And the question in so many words was, why is growth so painful? And the answer to that question is, growth is painful because growth requires change. Growth requires discipline. Growth requires restraint. Growth requires consistency. Growth requires determination. Now, change is hard because change requires you being uncomfortable and requires you to embrace something or someone you're not familiar with. Human beings are creatures of habit, and we hate change. We absolutely hate change. And the minute we come across something that forces us to change a habit or a way of thinking, we tend to push it away. Or when it gets really hard, we tend to just straight up quit. But if you truly want change in any form or any area of your life, you must embrace being uncomfortable. You must embrace pain. You either deal with the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. I've said that multiple times on this podcast. You deal with the pain of disciplining yourself from junk food, junk habits, junk people to truly change whatever it is about your life or in your life that you want to change. And if you don't, well, then you're simply going to deal with the pain of regret later on because you didn't change things that you could have or should have changed earlier in your life. Now, when it comes to growth is a lot like vegetables. It's not the best tasting thing in the world, but it's the best thing for you. Now, if you have your choice between a nice, juicy cheeseburger, some pizza, or some ice cream, or cakes, or brownies, or something like that, or broccoli, Brussels sprouts, greens, sweet potatoes, whatever, or some other kind of vegetable, well, most folks are going to pick the junk food simply because it tastes better, and it makes your taste buds feel oh so good. But the broccoli, the Brussels sprouts, the green beans, the peas, those are the things that your body really needs. Staying in bad habits or bad situations is a lot like junk food. It may taste good, it may smell good, it may even feel good, but it's not good for you. Embrace real life veggies by growing and changing things for yourself and for the better, no matter how bad it tastes. And don't use "I'm waiting on God." And I see a lot of people I see so many people do this. Don't use "I'm waiting on God" as an excuse. God will not do everything for you. As much as God loves you, he's simply not going to do everything for you. A prayer without works is a dream, and faith without works is dead. If you're asking God to change things in your life, then you better be prepared to show him what you're willing to do to prove to him that you truly want change. Yes, you should wait on God. Yes, you should be patient. And waiting on God and being patient at certain times in life is the best thing to do. But sometimes God is waiting on us to do something. Waiting on God doesn't mean stand and do nothing. Waiting on God simply means being patient about what it is that you're asking him to do for you. If you're asking God for a new job, be patient, but you still have to apply. If you're asking God for a new car, be patient, but you still have to go to work to make money to pay for it. If you're asking God for an awesome relationship, be patient, but you still have to be mindful about who you spend your time with and who you give your energy to see if you're compatible. If you're asking God to help you lose weight, be patient, but you still have to watch what you eat. You still have to get up and go work out. Growth and change go hand in hand. And during the process of both, it's not fun. It's not easy. It is painful at times, and you're going to feel like quitting. You're going to feel like giving up at times. Trust me, I can tell you from experience. Throughout this journey that I'm on with my weight, I have felt like giving up plenty of times. Throughout some of the other things that I'm working on, I felt like giving up plenty of times, but I just have to remember that God said he will never forsake me, he will never fail me, and he would help me get through this. God simply said, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. He never said the weapon wouldn't form. He just said the weapon wouldn't prosper. And if you truly want it, you're going to keep pushing. You're going to keep going in spite of how you feel, in spite of your emotions. And you have to remember, sometimes with human emotions and human feelings, Sometimes they can lie to us, and this is why it's so important when you're truly pushing for change. This is why it's important to really lean in on your faith, because your faith will help you through those times where it simply doesn't make sense. Now, the secret to true growth and change is to find your why. You have to find your why. Why do you want to change this particular aspect of your life? Why is it good for you? That's the key. Because when you find out your why, when you find out why you want to change something, when you find out why you truly want to do this, why you want to grow in this particular aspect, that's when you find the purpose in it. And that's the key. Finding the purpose in whatever it is that you're trying to do. And when you find the purpose in it, it keeps you going through those rough patches. It keeps you consistent after you've reached your goal. It keeps you wanting to improve, and it keeps you wanting to get better. Find your why. I can't stress that enough. And when you find your why, everything else becomes so much easier. Everything else becomes clearer. Growth and change are not easy, and they're not supposed to be. Nothing in life worth having is easy. Nothing in life worth having is easy. And if it's easy, it ain't worth having. You must embrace those growing pains. Keep God first, embrace the pain, and work towards the change. Trust me, when you get it, it is definitely, absolutely, 100% worth it. And now for the last segment on episode 55 of the Undrafted Podcast. This is some bull jive. Golden State Warrior part owner Mark Stevens was suspended from all NBA games for 1 year and given a slap on the wrist fine of $500,000. Now, this all comes after he was caught on tape pushing Raptors player Kyle Lowry, who dived into the stands chasing a loose ball. Bruh. This is one of the weakest punishments I've ever seen administered in all of sports. Mark Stevens is a venture capitalist who is worth over $2 billion with a B dollars. $500,000 is less than 0.5% of his net worth. $500,000 to him is like $5 to you and me. And a 1-year suspension is straight up weak. He should have had his ownership stake in the Warriors taken away, because it is in every piece of fine print in every professional sports league. You do not touch the players. Now, it's different if it's a situation where a player's walking off the court and he sticks his hand out and he lets you high five him, or if he's walking out of the arena and you catch him and say, hey, can I take an autograph, or can I get an autograph? Will you take a picture with us? Or if you shake his hand and he shakes your hand back, that's different, because in that instance, the player is telling you, hey, it's okay to touch me. But in a situation like this, where if they're jumping in the stands, they're not doing it just because. They're doing it because it's part of the action. It's part of what they're getting paid to do. Now, with this whole deal, another thing that really kind of got me with this deal, we've seen fans banned for life from arenas or league events for similar or even less offenses. And the NBA said that they went this route because he seemed contrite. Well, I mean, of course he seemed contrite. Everybody seems contrite when they get caught doing something they have no business doing. I mean, that's the whole point. This dude right here, the key word there is seemed. He seemed contrite. This dude is not truly apologetic. He's sorry that he got caught. And on top of the fact, what kind of message does this send from the NBA? This wasn't just some average fan who crossed the line and got caught up in the moment. This is a dude who is part of an NBA ownership group. So he knows the ins and outs of the rules better than anybody. Now, man to man, he knows he should have conducted himself in a respectful manner, and he simply chose not to do so. And the only reason why he did what he did is because he knew that in that environment and that particular moment, Kyle Lowry couldn't retaliate the way he truly wanted to. Because I guarantee you, this dude would not have touched him or said anything to him if these two men would have seen each other on the street. And now we have people saying Kyle Lowry should have just sucked it up and, should have just moved on and this and that and the other, blah, blah, blah. It's real funny that people like to blow stuff off until it happens to them or someone they love or someone that they have a vested interest in. Now, it's not like Kyle Lowry just jumped into the stands just because he wanted to just jump up there and have a good time. The dude was chasing a loose ball. And on the back of every NBA ticket stub, it says in so many words, when you sit that close to the action, when you sit that close to the court, you're liable for things to happen when players, they go out of bounds chasing loose balls, and they may get pushed out of bounds, they may fall, they trip, whatever. you're liable for things to happen there. And basically, in so many words, the NBA says, hey, you're on your own when you pay this money to sit this close. So this dude pushes him, and then he cusses at him, and he's an NBA owner. And he's just going to get a fine and a little suspension, a slap on the wrist like that? I mean, other owners have lost their teams just by saying the wrong things. But this dude pushes a player and gets this. If this dude would have pushed somebody on the street the way he pushed Kyle Lowry, they could press charges for assault on him, and they would be within every single of their right to do so. NBA, this weak punishment y'all handed this dude for what he did, that's some bull jive. Well, that's my time for this episode of the Undrafted Podcast. I want to take this time to thank my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for blessing me with the gifts, the talents, the resources to do this podcast. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to tune in. Remember, you can follow the Undrafted Podcast on Instagram at the Undrafted Podcast or on Twitter at RoForShowPro. Also, you can catch the Undrafted Podcast on Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Podcast, and iHeartRadio. And I want to leave you with the Bible verse today. One of my favorite ones, Philippians 4:7. And the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Remember, do your best and let God handle the rest. Be blessed.